Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking on a really difficult but incredibly important topic. We're looking at source material covering the Clarke family murders in Australia.
That's right. It's a detailed account of a tragedy from 2020, one that really shook the country and, well, forced some hard conversations.
And our goal here, for you listening, is to really go beyond just the headlines. We want to distill what the sources tell us about the background, the legal context, which is quite complex, the event itself, and crucially, its legacy.
Yeah, because understanding how this happened is key to understanding the societal shifts that followed. The sources make it clear this wasn't just a private tragedy, it became a public catalyst.
So the core event we're focusing on, February 19th, 2020, Camp Hill, Queensland. Rowan Baxter murdered his estranged wife, Hannah Clarke, who was 31, and their 3 children.
Aaliyah, who was 6, Leanna 4, and little Trey, just 3 years old.
The method, as detailed in the sources, was horrific. It was arson. He used petrol to set their car on fire while they were inside. It's classified as a quadruple murder-suicide.
And the reason we're doing this deep dive, the real hook from the source material, is that this event sparked a national debate about domestic violence in Australia. That's the core takeaway we need to explore.
It really did. It forced everyone to look at the systems supposedly in place to protect people.
Because, as we'll see, the perpetrator, Rowan Baxter, he wasn't unknown to the system. He was subject to a domestic violence order, a DVO. He was involved in custody disputes.
Right, so the system was engaged, which raises the really difficult question, doesn't it? How could this still happen? That's what we need to unpack based on the sources.
Exactly. We need to look at the history of abuse the sources describe, the back and forth with the legal orders, and what that tells us about risk, especially with coercive control.
Okay, let's start with that history. Section 1, the relationship background and legal battles. Where did the sources begin?
Well, they start with Hannah Clarke meeting Rowan Baxter back in 2008. She was born in '88, so she would have been, what, 19 or 20?
Yeah, just 19. And Baxter, born in '77, was about 11 years older. The source mentions he was New Zealand-born, had a background in rugby league, even trialed for the New Zealand Warriors.
So, a bit of a profile there. They got married in 2012 in Kingscliff, New South Wales. And then they had their 3 children, Aaliyah, Leanna, and Trey.
On the surface, maybe a typical family setup. But the sources are clear that beneath that surface, things were very wrong.
Very wrong. The reports that came out after the murders, detailed in our source material, alleged a long history of abuse, not just at the end, but throughout the marriage.
And it wasn't just one type of abuse, was it? The sources specify several kinds.
No, and this is critical for understanding the later focus on coercive control. The allegations included emotional abuse, physical violence, sexual abuse, and financial abuse. It was comprehensive.
That financial abuse element, it often gets overlooked, but it's such a powerful tool of control.
Absolutely. The source mentioning it implies it wasn't just about disagreements over money. It's about restricting independence, limiting access to funds, maybe controlling whether she could work, building debt in her name. It creates dependency. It makes leaving incredibly hard.
It's that pattern of control, isn't it, which makes the victim feel trapped, unable to make their own choices, or even access help sometimes.
Precisely. And this alleged pattern is the backdrop for when the legal system gets involved. There was a specific incident that acted as the catalyst for the domestic violence order, the DVO.
What was that incident, according to the sources?
It was on Boxing Day, 2019. Baxter allegedly kidnapped their daughter, Leanna.
Kidnapped his own daughter.
Allegedly, yes. That act really escalated things, obviously, and moved it beyond just relationship conflict into a serious criminal matter, and that's what led to the DVO being issued against him.
Okay, so a DVO is put in place that's supposed to offer protection, impose restrictions, but this is where the timeline gets, well, messy. The sources describe a kind of legal seesaw.
Yeah, it's quite confusing and concerning when you lay it out. After the DVO, they went into mediation for custody. Hannah, through her lawyers, offered Baxter a consent order.
A consent order, that's legally binding, right? Filed with the court.
Exactly. It
Right.
would have been enforceable by law. The offer was for 165 days of custody per year, which is, quite significant access.
And Baxter's response.
He refused it, flat out refused to sign, apparently went against his own lawyer's advice.
Wow. Refusing a formal, legally binding agreement that still gave him substantial time with his kids? What does that signal?
Well, looking back, it signals a potential unwillingness to be constrained by the court, doesn't it? To be held legally accountable if he breached the terms. He didn't want those formal boundaries.
Okay, so he refuses the binding order. But then what happens with the DVO itself? Does it get stricter?
This is the really jarring part. No. In January 2020, just weeks later, the DVO was actually varied in the Holland Park Magistrates Court.
Buried how?
Varied to restore Baxter's full access to the children.
Wait, he refuses a legally binding custody agreement, which seems like a warning sign, and then the court eases the DVO restrictions to give him full access back.
That's what the sources indicate. It's a profound contradiction. You have the DVO system meant for protection and the family law impulse towards maintaining parental contact, seemingly pulling in opposite directions.
It really makes you question the risk assessment, doesn't it? What information was prioritized? Was the alleged history of abuse, the kidnapping incident, the refusal to sign the consent order, was all that weighed properly against the idea of parental access?
That's the core question debated after the fact. Did the system underestimate the danger signals? Because after getting full access back via the court order, did he then agree to the binding consent order?
Did he sign it then?
No. Still refused the legally binding one. Instead, he signed something called a parenting agreement.
What's the difference?
Crucially, the source notes this parenting agreement was explicitly not legally binding. It gave him the same level of access the court had just restored, but without the teeth of a formal court order.
So he gets the access he wants, but avoids the version that carries real legal consequences for breaches.
Effectively, yes. It seems like a way to secure access while minimizing accountability. A non-binding agreement relies on goodwill and trusts things that are fundamentally broken in situations involving alleged abuse like this.
It seems like he chose the path of least resistance, legally speaking, or rather least accountability.
But even that didn't last long. His access, even under this non-binding agreement, was revoked again shortly after.
Why? What happened?
In early February 2020, just before the murders, police charged Baxter with breaching the original DVO. And because of that breach, the non-binding access he had was taken away completely.
So it's this incredibly volatile cycle. DVO issued, offer of binding custody refused, DVO varied down, giving access, non-binding agreement signed, DVO breach, access revoked entirely, all within weeks.
Exactly. The pressure must have been immense. You can see the situation escalating rapidly towards that final tragic point.
And amidst all this legal turmoil, the source mentioned something important about Hannah's identity.
Yes, a small but significant detail. It notes she had legally started using her maiden name, Clarke, again, instead of Baxter.
In the context of separating from someone allegedly abusive, reclaiming your name like that, it feels like a powerful act of trying to regain control of her own identity.
It absolutely does. A symbolic step towards independence, even while the legal processes around her were arguably failing to keep her safe.
Okay, let's move into the second section. The attack itself and the immediate outcome. This is obviously very difficult content.
It is. So after Baxter's access was finally revoked in early February, the sources detail the events of February 19th, 2020.
Where and when did the attack happen?
It happened in Camp Hill, a suburb of Brisbane, Queensland. It was morning. Hannah was doing the school run, driving Aaliyah, Liana, and Trey. A moment of routine, deliberately targeted.
And the method used?
Arson. The sources are clear. Baxter approached the car, or got in, doused the interior with petrol, and ignited it. An act of extreme, calculated violence.
The horror of that is unimaginable. But Hannah, even in that state, she provided crucial information, didn't she?
She did. It's incredibly courageous. Bystanders pulled her from the burning car. She had horrific burns, ultimately covering 97% of her body, but she was conscious initially.
As she spoke.
Yes. She explicitly told the bystanders, and later the first responders, that Rowan Baxter had poured petrol on her. There was no doubt who did it or how. Her own words confirmed it.
That's vital evidence, directly from the victim. What was Baxter doing while this was happening? While the car was burning with his children inside?
According to the sources, his actions were just monstrous. He actively tried to stop bystanders who were trying to extinguish the fire or help the children.
He prevented rescue attempts.
That's what's reported. It shows a terrifying commitment to ensuring the children died. It wasn't impulsive, it was methodical. After preventing help, he then stabbed himself at the scene.
And died there.
Yes, he died at the scene from self-inflicted stab wounds.
So the immediate fatalities were?
Aaliyah, Liana, and Trey died in the car. Hannah was alive when pulled out, but critically injured. She was rushed to the Royal Brisbane Hospital.
But she couldn't be saved.
No. Despite the medical efforts, the bites were too severe. She died later that evening.
So the event is classified correctly as a quadruple murder-suicide. Hannah, Aaliyah, Liana, Trey, all murdered by Baxter, who then killed himself.
Yes. 4 lives lost. Understanding that scale is critical to grasping the national reaction that followed.
Right, let's move to that. Section 3, the national legacy and the calls for change. This tragedy wasn't just statistics. It resonated deeply, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The brutality, the fact children were involved, the history of alleged abuse coming out, it triggered this immense wave of public grief and, frankly, anger.
How did that manifest initially?
Very quickly, just 4 days later, February 23rd, there was a huge public vigil. It was held at the Bill Hewitt Reserve in Camp Hill near the scene. The sources say over 1,000 people turned up.
1,000 people. That shows the depth of feeling, doesn't it? Taking it beyond just a local crime.
Exactly. It became a focal point for mourning, but also for demanding action. And this public sentiment was reflected politically, too.
How so?
At the joint funeral for Hannah and the children on March 9th, 2020, some very high-profile figures attended. The Australian Prime Minister at the time, Scott Morrison, was there, and the Queensland Premier, Anastasia Palaszczuk.
Having the national leader and the state leader attend sends a powerful message.
It signals that this is a national issue, a systemic issue, not just a terrible, isolated crime. It acknowledged the broader context.
And that broader context immediately became this national debate the sources mentioned.
Instantly. The details emerging about Baxter's alleged history, the violence, the control, the reports of misogyny from family and friends cited in sources, combined with the confusing DVO situation, it all fueled this intense discussion about domestic violence.
But specifically, it seemed to crystallize around one particular concept.
Yes, coercive control. That became the absolute key takeaway and the focus of the legacy. While domestic violence awareness existed, this case really hammered home the danger of non-physical abuse patterns.
Can we just clarify that term again? Coercive control. Because it's so central here.
Yeah, definitely. Coercive control isn't about isolated incidents. It's a pattern of behavior using tactics like intimidation, degradation, isolation, and crucially, financial abuse and monitoring, all designed to make a person subordinate and dependent, to strip away their freedom and autonomy.
So it's the overarching strategy of dominance, not just the occasional outburst of violence, though that could be part of it.
Exactly. And the alleged history of emotional and financial abuse in Hannah's case fit this definition perfectly. It provided a devastatingly clear example for the public and policymakers.
So clear, in fact, that Hannah herself received recognition for this.
Yes, posthumously. Marie Claire magazine named her one of their Women of the Year in December 2020, and the citation specifically highlighted the nationwide awareness her case brought to coercive control in Australia.
That's quite something. Her tragedy became the catalyst for understanding this insidious form of abuse.
It absolutely did, and it led to tangible action. Following the murders, several Australian states, including Queensland where it happened, and New South Wales, launched serious reviews and started moving towards criminalizing coercive control.
So new laws specifically targeting that pattern of behavior.
Yes, trying to create legal tools to intervene before it escalates to lethal violence. Recognizing that pattern as a crime in itself, that's a direct legislative legacy from this case, according to the sources.
Beyond the government and legal changes, Hannah's family also took action, didn't they?
They did. They showed incredible strength. In March 2020, very soon after, her parents set up a foundation.
What's it called?
Small Steps for Hannah. The name itself is quite poignant, suggesting early intervention, taking those small preventative steps.
And their mission?
The source quotes their mission statement, put a H-alt to the incidences and severity of domestic and family violence in Australia. H-alt-E being an acronym as well, standing for Hannah, Aaliyah, Liana, and Trey.
That's powerful. So they created this ongoing advocacy organization.
Yes, providing education, pushing for reform, supporting victims. It ensures the conversation continues, driven by the family's lived experience.
And there's also a physical memorial.
Yes, back in Camp Hill, that Bill Hewitt Reserve, where the vigil was held, now has a dedicated section called Hannah's Place.
What's there?
The source mentions a sign, a shelter for reflection, and newly planted trees. It was opened officially on September 8th, 2020.
September 8th?
It would have been Hannah's 32nd birthday. Her family was there with a local counselor. It's a permanent space for the community to remember and a constant reminder of what was lost.
Okay, let's try to synthesize this as we wrap up. For you, the listener, what are the core knowledge points from this deep dive?
I think first is the sheer complexity and the potential pitfalls within the legal system when dealing with domestic violence. The DVO process, custody battles, binding versus non-binding orders, it's fraught with challenges.
Second, the nature of the abuse itself. Recognizing that domestic violence isn't just physical. The sources emphasize the alleged emotional, financial, sexual aspects, pointing clearly towards coercive control.
And third, that direct link between this specific horrific event and the major national shift in awareness and legislative action around coercive control. This case forced that change.
The sources also do something interesting. They place this Australian case in a wider context.
Yeah, they do. They explicitly connect the Clarke family murders to other similar awful cases internationally. They mention familicide, the killing of one's own family members, and specifically car arson homicides.
Which cases do they cite?
The Powell family murders in the U.S., which had some chilling similarities, and the murder of Sera di Pietrantonio in Italy, also involving fire.
So it highlights that these dynamics, extreme control, possessiveness, lethal retaliation, when a partner tries to leave, sadly, they aren't unique to one country.
No, it underlines that this is a broader societal pattern, a global issue that different legal systems are grappling with, often inadequately.
Which brings us to our final thought. We kept coming back to the system's involvement, didn't we? Hannah Clarke engaged with the system. She got a DVO. There was mediation. There were court variations. Access was granted, then revoked. Multiple interventions.
Multiple interventions. And yet, the worst possible outcome still happened. The system was involved, but it didn't prevent the tragedy.
So the question this leaves us with, building directly on the source material, if the legal system, despite multiple points of contact and intervention as detailed in these sources, failed to stop this predictable escalation of coercive control into murder,
then what fundamental changes are needed and how risk is assessed? Especially, how do we weigh documented patterns of control against assumptions about parental rights to ensure safety is genuinely the top priority? How does the system move from just documenting risk to actively, effectively preventing the final act?
That's the heavy question we leave you with. How do we make the interventions truly protective? Something to think about.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.